try to solve that problem. But this was kind of a buy one, get one free week, since this is a very heavy week. We have Sunday the Passion, and then Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and Easter. And I wanted somehow to collect all of that in this last little selection. So that's why we have so many, and we clearly won't be able to look at them all today. But let's dive in and just have no agenda again this time, other than to invite you to share a poem that you enjoyed particularly, or puzzled you, or
So unfinished business. I brought my picture.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Can you pass it around?
When you mentioned last night.
Yeah, no, that's sort of the antithesis of the original life in Skid Row. This picture, I don't know if anybody was here. This, it bought this picture some years ago at a convention. And somebody had, in a ministry to the homeless, had handed out disposable cameras and said, take a picture of your life or whatever. And this one was one that was taken by a homeless person. And it was sort of the antithesis of the poem we read last week from Skid Row, that there is no hope, there's no life. It's, you know, like such a many die.
we've just been hustling your two poems. They're on the table there, but come in.
The first one that you asked me to do, I've actually printed it out. I've actually.
It's been copied.
It's been copied. That's the other one, and we have both of them.
Yeah, you have both. They're on the
Oh, great!
tablet, right? By the
Oh, that's fantastic. I love
right
it.
side of the
I'm so pleased.
computer.
Great.
So glad that you can join us. I thought you would be.
Oh, I got dispensation.
All right.
So I'm taking the risk of not practicing singing, and I'm coming here. I'm risking everything.
And if it doesn't work out, it's all on me, right?
It's not saying anything.
They've been delaying last week talking about this picture. Thinking about a homeless person.
Oh, good. Is there any other old business? New business.
New business,
New poem, isn't it?
new poems. I like the donkey.
Isn't that?
I like a lot of this last set was probably my favorite set. I mean, Emily Dickinson appealed to me, and
They're not.
Winford.
Not all of them are published artists.
Yeah. Or should they be? But Holy Week.
Although poor old Judith was kind of sad, but that's good done. Yeah, I love it.
But the title I thought was great, and then obviously I get the meaning of it, but just by itself. But really, it was the author that caught my eye, G.K. Chesterton, because I said, could that be the same Chesterton? It's Father Brown, right? So he is a famous detective author, writer of the Father Brown, and then that became a popular PBS series. I did not know he was a poet, so that forced me to go and look at his biography and learned all sorts of stuff about him.
I really didn't know about the Father Brown, and he's a Roman Catholic apologist, and that's how I first became aware of it. And when I became aware of his poetry.
Yeah. He's sort of like the godfather of what they call a type of mystery that is cozy. If you ever heard of the term cozy mystery, it's a genre.
I soft topic, but sort of has to do with Chesterton and Father Brown. One year, as I was driving my daughter to school in Iowa, I took a collection of Father Brown to listen to. So I was listening to all these mysteries as I was driving. And and you can tell that this guy has a significant moral sense. It comes out in the books, maybe more so than in the film adaptations, the screen adaptations. But he doesn't want to really convict anybody. He wants to bring somebody to repentance.
Yeah.
And then sort of let them deal with the consequences of their action, but he doesn't want to be sort of find himself in a position of being the judge.
That's very interesting. I think we ought to schedule another series on histories. I haven't had the series, but I discovered, particularly among P.D. James's earlier novels, that there is underlying those stories a profound moral sense of right and wrong. And when I happened to read one of the P.D. James ones, I can't remember which one, at the just right in close proximity with an American kind of swashbuckling, shoot 'em up, kill 'em up, crime solving story, and was struck by the amorality of the second one and the underlying concern that the priest's name in P.D. James, he appears in the middle.
Dalglish.
Dalglish, he's the son of the priest. He's incidentally a cop who's
Yes. Yeah.
and
Right.
And his whole approach, both in the way he solves mysteries, but in the way he deals with people, is profoundly moral, as opposed to this guy lived on the most called busted flush. Very kind of vote that has a clear double meaning. It's not just a over thing. It is. Anyway, he just shoots people and they're done. That's it. We've gotten off the dog.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Would you like to read the dog?
Sure.
I love it.
Yeah. Oh, just to follow up on the Father Brown became so popular both in Great Britain and in America with Masterpiece Theater that they followed it up with Grantchester, and that's one you would really like. It always ends on a sermon, so it's a priest who's a detective.
I've watched some of them.
You have watched some of those, yeah. So my daughter, who is, we call her agnostic, she's probably atheist, but she and I love both Father Brown and because it does have this moral. She approaches it from one aspect, I approach it from another. We meet in the middle ground. The donkey. When fishes flew and forests walked, and figs grew upon thorn, some moment when the moon was blood, then surely I was born. With monstrous head and sickening cry, and ears like errant wings, the devil's walking parody on all four-footed things. The tattered outlaw of the earth, of ancient crooked will, starve, scourge, deride me, I am dumb, I keep my secret still. Fools, for I also had my hour. One far fierce hour and sweet, there was a shout about my ears and palms before my feet.
It's fun, isn't it?
Yeah. Lots of visual metaphors there.
Interesting, the tattered outlaw of the earth, devil's walking parody. I had a colleague in graduate school, and I won't go into the whole thing, but one of his projects had to do with studying donkeys and or asses in antiquity. And it turns out that basically they're the equivalent of a pickup truck. They were the ancient equivalent of a pickup truck. And so, when I see parody and all of these kind of things, I mean, I can see that from a poetic standpoint, sort of a modern standpoint. But in the ancient world, they were not so dismissive. dismissed.
Yeah, that's true. Donkeys do take a bit.
Well, and, I was just thinking about pickup trucks and hierarchy and who looks down on people that drive, ratty old pickup trucks. And there is that, I don't know, caste system or something, that the white collar people may well look down on people who drive, pickup trucks because that's what they work, that's, not, maybe it was then too, it was the pickup truck of the old days, but I don't know if that was a status symbol or a symbol of, or maybe it was a status symbol, but not the way we think of, Cadillac versus broken down truck. I don't know, interesting.
That's like, don't judge a book by its cover. And this don't, they who are last will be first, and so on. That's also the thing.
I think this is a very lovely poem. I don't know if it demands too much more of our time. But the donkey appears also at the nativity and has a more exalted role there as the one whose breath warms the child. I can't remember the source of that, but I think it's another poem somewhere back in this hazy mess in my mind. Well, just we might just as well do Judas. He's next on a piece of paper. I just read this poem with profound sadness. It's a look at Judas that I hadn't had before. He's generally just sort of passed off as the bad guy. And this is a fairly sympathetic look at Judas, I think. But Judas, always I lay upon the brink of love, impotent, waiting till the waters stirred. And no one healed my weakness with a word, for no one healed me who lacked words to prove my heart, which, when the kiss of Mary wove his shroud, my tongueless anguish heard the cruel descent, and which each time I heard God whisper to him, moaned but could not move. While Peter deeply drowsed within love's deep, I cramped upon its margins, glad to share the sop Christ gave me, yet its bitter bite dried up my dust. Praise Peter, who could weep his sin away, but never see me where I hang, huge teardrop on the cheek of night. Here's this guy who's, obviously we know that Peter, James, and John are sort of the inner circle of the disciples. But Judas, I think, feels himself to be sort of the 12, he's number 13. There's just something that prevents him from loving completely and accepting where he is without a sense of hurt or resentment, or he wants more, but he can't bring himself to do what might bring him more. And so this whole sense of being on the brink or cramped on the periphery, I just think is profoundly sad. And then that develops into a resentment, and then My tongueless anguish burned to cool the scent, you know. He doesn't start being the enemy of Jesus. He is this sense of not being as intimate with Jesus as he perceives some of the others festers, and somehow evolves into us, you know, from anguish into descent into this terrible act of betrayal. And I just found that a very human reading of the Judas story, and as I say, just left me profoundly sad.
I was, two comments. One is, in case you've never noticed this or you didn't know it, Jesus Christ Superstar is really told from the standpoint of Judas. You know, and that's why he's got such a huge role in that play musical movie. You know, which is part of this, you know. But the other thing, and it's in the Passion Gospel, and I was the evangelist at the early service, so I got to read all this stuff that, you know, sometimes I'm not reading because I'm passing over it. And whoever reads the Passion Gospel by themselves anyway. but in this one, you know, this is the one where Judas goes back and tries to give back the money. And so, and that he repents. That word repent shows up in the Passion Gospel in Matthew. I don't know if we think about that very often, you know. I mean, we sort of do remember occasionally that he wanted to give the money back and they wouldn't take it. But I don't think that we factor that into our picture of Judas as much as we factor all the other kinds of things into it. And I don't know what that means, whether that's part of what's that Ambassador Miller is sort of getting at, that longing and oops, I made a mistake and now I want back in, that being on the periphery. But that after I read this, whatever, earlier this week, and then read that piece in the Passion narrative this book.
Yeah, I think one of the gifts of poetry is that it provides, well, I'll do it in this person, it provides me language for things I've always known but never been able to put into words. And that is, I think, one of the really delightful, wonderful gifts of poetry. And in many ways, I had this experience. You know, I've sometimes felt on the periphery and wanted to be more intimately involved with a group or with a task or with somebody, and not knowing how to do it, but you know, somehow resenting quietly the people who I thought were enjoying more intimate connection than I was, and you know, I felt that sort of move toward resentment. It's been too long. But that's, I think really to sort of step back and take a larger look about what at least I've been about during this Lent series is just the power of these poems to let me get in touch with some of my own experiences as a human being. And really in a very safe way. I mean, to read the story of Judas, I can touch that, but I don't become psychopathic by confronting some unbearable reality. But in many ways, these poems are, I think, sort of about what in the 19th century the British called everything. Sort of that human experience. And
so I just feel that you're right. I just think that this has been really, it sounds amazing, but this has been the best Lenten type giving up or whatever, you know, experience. Instead of giving up chocolate or cake or something, this gets to the core of what living is and life is and understanding is. And I just think it's really fantastic that you've brought this, everybody, Father Gary, and everyone's brought this to us so that we could get to the core of what it means, you know, what we're going through in the Lenten period.
Well, thank you. I slid Celeste a little money.
I'm well, I'm going for the next.
To give sort of the catch about what the purpose of this whole exercise was. Well, more poems. Yeah, thank you. That's exactly what I thought we were about.
Oh, great.
Thank you. I don't want to put Gary on the spot much. But there is a nice George Hervey line at the end.
In the Easter side.
Yeah, we're actually, this sort of, the way this works is sort of the last several poems are really for next Sunday, but we're not reading this.
Right. Well, I did like the Easter wings. I'll read it. Lord, who createst man in wealth and store, though foolishly he lost the same, decaying more and more till he became most poor. With thee, O let me rise as larks harmoniously, and sing this day thy victories, then shall the fall further the flight in me. My tender age and sorrow did begin, and still with sickness and shame thou didst so punish sin that I became most thin. With thee let me combine and feel this day thy victory. For if I imp my wing on thine, affliction shall advance the flight in me. The thing I thought about this poem, I mean, other than I don't think I've ever seen the word imp used this way, but was that I wish we could read from the bottom up. Right, because and maybe that's part of it, is that we start in the downside, and then it goes to the point, and then it gets bigger. But and you know, sort of this, and this day as large harmonious, sing this day thy victories. You would think that would be at the top, right? But the way that we read is down. So I you know, it's kind of like reading left to right or right to left, but you can't say read from the bottom up.
Yeah, there are these two themes in each section that is built into the shape.
Mhm.
And it's dichotomous, you know, like you mentioned, one is sort of bad going to good. And I saw the same thing you did, but flipped. And that if this is like a chalice or maybe a brass candlestick, that you have a foundation. So it's the Lord's power, the positive spirit is the foundation of something holding it up. And then, you know, here are our shortcomings here. Different twist.
George Herbert is fun because his poems are visual as well as verbal. And exactly, I mean, the first thing you see is this hourglass shape. And just in, well, I was going to say this rather cynically, and I don't mean it that way. Just in case you miss it, he tells us, because you notice that at the very narrowest in the first stanza, it's most poor. And then at the very narrowest in the second stanza, it's most thin. So the words and the shape are they reinforce each other. And I played with the shape a lot and finally determined birds. At first I thought they were butterflies, now we think of butterflies as Easter coming out of the chrysalis. It's a very popular image for Easter. But he talks about larks harmoniously singing. And then, as if I didn't get it, he has to tell me in the last line of each stanza, flight. So here's a lark in flight. So I went through hourglass and went to butterfly. I went through one other, I can't remember what it was, but finally determined I'll settle on bird wings. And I think the shape is I agree absolutely. You start, I see the first stanza as kind of the experience of humanity at large. Lord, who createst man and wealth and store, and then, then sin, constrained man, humankind, until reincarnation with thee, let me rise, but and life becomes more full and abundant again. Then the second one is my tender age and sorrow did begin. So now it's the same story being recapitulated in my individual life.
It's first person rather than third
Yeah.
person.
And I firmly believe that a really good poem stands on its own. You don't need to know the biography of the poet. You don't need to know any of the literary tricky references the poet makes. If you happen to know any of that, it may enrich your reading. But the poem can stand on it, can and should stand on its own. And I think this one clearly does. I mean, we can, even if you were not a Christian, you would have this, you would be able to see this narrative of life being further and further constrained and then somehow released and becoming more abundant again. And that's a wonderful human story. So, I was going to say something after all that. But the other thing I did want to say is there is an interesting trick, not a trick, a theme in the final line of each of these stanzas. Then shall the fall, in Adam's fall we see it all, then shall the fall further the flight indeed. Almost the sense that it's how do they pronounce it in Latin? Felix School, the happy mistake or the happy screw up. And that's a common theme, particularly in medieval theology, that the fall was really the beginning of the story of grace, because without the fall, then we wouldn't have the incarnation. And so there's a sense that if we just kind of lived innocently in Eden forever, we would just live innocently in Eden forever. But somehow our humanity was made more complete, and we experienced a fuller humanity because of the fall. We then experienced this full invitation to an even more of it. And so there's this kind of double sense that the fall furthers the flight in me. And in the second stanza, affliction shall advance the flight in me. So it's not simply restoration, it's going beyond restoration to more abundant completion somehow. So this is, I think you can unpack a lot in this poem in this poem. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Gary, but you picked out a couple George Herbert before.
Was George Herbert the one last week that had the diagonal message?
Mhm. You like to play with words.
Yeah.
It's interesting that there's the few of the poems that you've chosen all have that same deeper meaning of suffering can make you see, suffering can make you grow. Like prayer, that's one of them, and the miracle of mourning, they both speak the same. Suffering can either make you grow, or if you're tested, that can help you grow. And so it's testing is also a bit of suffering to go with testing. And so miracle of the prayer and the miracle of mourning say that quite strongly. That suffering can lead you into knowing and growing and seeing. So the seeing is also important too. And they mention suffering in the prayer and in Mary's miracle of mourning. That's also amazing because that has it in it as well. So and the suffering giving the poet wings is amazing too, because it has Easter wings. So what's Easter about? What happens? So it's like suffering gives you wings, Easter wings. So I sort of combined a lot of those poems together, which have the same being tested, going through something and in order to see and to grow and to be. And I thought that was quite interesting. I don't know if you did it deliberately, but I felt that as I went through so many poems that you chose.
And I didn't intend to do that. As I've said before, these poems were selected solely because they appeared to me to be somehow related to the readings for the Sunday. But I guess the people who put together our Sunday lectionary had something going on.
Isn't Isn't that interesting? But I thought it was really great because that's life. As you say, if you're in Eden, having a wonderful time, are you actually learning stuff really? Are you growing? You know, whereas if you get out of Eden and experience all these amazing, running the gauntlet things, you're going to grow for sure. You get to the other side and you think, wow, I did this, that, and the other. I grew from that amazing experience.
Yeah. Well, now that you mentioned it, there's a certain sort of tedious similarity.
I thought it was great. I love that, deciphering that similarity.
I have to tell you that I think my favorite, well, that's not my word. The poem that I think may have struck me most deeply in all of them that we looked at during Lent is Cowley Cullen's The Litany of the Dark People. Cowley Cullen was an American Black poet, active in the poem Renaissance, and wrote The Litany of the Dark People. All flesh that was a battleground shows now the morning break. The ancient deities are drowned for thy eternal sake. Now that the past is left behind, fling wide thy garments hem to keep us one with thee in mind, thou Christ of Bethlehem. The thorny reed may ridge our brow, the spear may mar our side, and on white wood from scented bough we may be crucified. Yet no assaults the old gods make upon our agony shall swerve our footsteps from the way of thine for Calvary. And if we hunger now and thirst, grant our withholders may, when heaven's constellations burst upon thy coming day, be fed by us and given to see thy mercy in our eyes when Bethlehem and Calvary are merged in paradise. I didn't realize how important that poem was until I was in conversation with a friend out at Greencrest. And we were having coffee, and the purpose of this coffee was to plan his memorial service. And he is the son of a Presbyterian pastor who was actually the president of the American University in Colorado for years and years and years. And so his experience has been deeply involved in the church and in sort of a missionary theology and so on. And so our conversation drifted. I asked him why he, a Presbyterian, was testing me and Episcopalian to do this service. Well, he just had become inactive. He didn't have a fight with the church. He just had become inactive and wasn't affiliated with a parish. So anyway, so we talked about the church and all sorts of things, and I found myself saying, this is sort of entering the conversation from the back door. I found myself saying that I thought the Black church really got the gospel teachings in a way that I think we in the white church may not have as deeply taken those teachings into ourselves. And I thought about this poem and shared it with him after this. But just to run quickly through the poem, it begins with our flesh that was a battleground. The whole experience of slavery. But now, it shows now the morning break. The dawning new age with the incarnation, with the nativity, and new age begins. The ancient deities are drowned. Deities here I take to be oppression, greed, profit motive, all the things that contributed to a slave economy in the South. And now that the past is left behind, this is a poem that's written, is it Paul Tillich, I guess, was the employing phrase we did between the times. Was that Tillich? The new age was initiated with Christ, but it has not come to completion. The final consummation hasn't occurred. So we're somehow in between. We live with one foot in the old world redeemed and with one foot in the new world of redemption. And so the Christian ethic is how do you live in between the times? And this poem is written from in between the times. So the poet goes on to say, now the past is left behind, fling wide thy garments and keep us one with thee in mind. A couple of weeks ago, today we read the Philippians passage today. Let this mind be among you that was with Christ, who emptied himself and did not seek the grandeur of divinity, but emptied himself to take upon himself the form of a servant. And so the poet is pleading that we have this mind, we share this mind with Christ. The thorny wreath may bridge our brow, the spear may mar our side, using images of Christ's suffering, applying it to our human experience. We're not done with the suffering. We haven't gotten out the front door yet. The suffering will go on, the persecution will go on. you know, he was writing from the perspective of Jim Crow and racism that was rampant and all of that during the first part of the 20th century and obviously still is. And this very painful one on the white cross from a Sunday vow. You know, I happen to be a white middle class man, so nailed me. On the white cross from the Sunday vow, we may be crucified. Yet, he says, no assaults the old gods make upon our agony shall swerve our footsteps from the way of line for Calvary. So he's encouraging. I see this almost as a pilgrimage. Here is the leader encouraging and supporting his people. Keep the faith. Have this one mind among yourselves. And if we hunger now and thirst, grant our withholders, I read to be formerly slave owners, slavers, now people who through whatever apparatus still hold people of color in some sort of slavery and servitude. Whether it's institutional racism or you can chronicle the list as well as I can. Grant that our withholders may, when heaven's constellations burst upon my crowning day, when the final consummation comes. But this is the genius of this poem, I think, and also the genius of the Black church. I mean, we can't paint the whole Black church with one brush, but as I would say, have come to understand it through the public speakings of people like Martin Luther King Jr. and others, and Black Christians whom I have known. The moment of grace is not deferred until the final consummation. We live between the times. So as Tillich would say, here and there, now and then, there are these little bursts of the reign of God. It's happening, folks. That's what Bethlehem is all about. It's breaking in, it's bursting in on us. So he's not writing solely about the future consummation. He's writing about the day that's coming now. When heaven's constellations birthed upon thy crowning day, now he's referring to the withholders, may be fed by us and given to see thy mercy in our lives. That, I used the expression already, but this poem sort of stabs me in the heart. The servitude that these people were forced into, they now accept willingly, because that is the way of the gospel. Christ came not to be served, but to serve. He emptied himself and took on the form of a servant. He washed his disciples' feet. The mark of the new community is a community of servants. And so Colin does not see the final resolution of his people's story as retribution, paying back for all the sins and sufferings that we've suffered. somehow getting even, but rather we become a servant, so that in their eyes, the dark people, as to use Cullen's title words, that the former withholders will see in the eyes of the people who are now willingly and have chosen to serve him, will see Christ's mercy in their eyes. It really captures for me that paradox of the gospel where the world is turned upside down and the world's values are just obliterated. And the greatest among you will be the servant. And as Celeste said, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. So the new age is not an age of turning society upside down, so that the bad guys now get punished, and the good guys have this sort of satisfaction knowing that the score has been settled. But the whole system is so transformed that people who previously were forced into servitude now desire and willingly accept the role of serving, because that is most genuinely how they become who they were called to be in Christ. But it is their choice. It's very difficult for me to put this in words, which is why poets exist, because they can put these things in words in a way that plain folks like you can. But I just, again, this is a poem I've been familiar with, but it didn't really occur to me until I was in conversation with this friend at Greenfest. And I thought about this poem in the context of our conversation,
I think to a great extent, it's who is my master? You know, the withholders, the ancient deities. That was a case of slavery being imposed by a wicked master. And what it flips is to keep the mind of Christ that they're talking about. He took on the role of the slave, the servant. But there's I think there's that sense of that slavery has value, that servanthood has value because we're serving the right master.
that's helpful. Which bring, it just came into my mind. There's that prayer and morning prayer. And my poor feeble mind, I used to remember all these things. Don't now, but that one of the morning columns, one of the two fixed morning columns in morning prayer is addressed to God, whose service is perfect freedom. And that's, it's about who your master is.
I like it that the one word that shows you that there is hope is merged. Because if you're talking about the black church and the white church and colour and so on, then if they're merged at one, then Bethlehem and Calvary, they're merged together. So suffering, hope, it's all merged as one. And so there is hope. There's hope from the past into the future. Because if there was all that problem with the slavery, etc., that has now merged into the hope of the birth and become as one together so that there's no longer separation. There is only a merger together to make things richer. So we get back to the thing of suffering and growth. It's lovely, the word merge, because it means togetherness. And
Well, and that reflects the next to the last line in the first stanza, to keep us one with thee in mind.
mm, mm.
Well, that was a conversation starter, wasn't it?
That was.
But I just, my experience with reading poetry is that I read and become familiar with the poem, and then the silly thing pops up and smacks me when I least expect it. For example, talking about this guy's funeral service. And he was sort of lamenting that, you know, the mainline Christian churches were DOA and all of that. And for some reason, this poem popped into my mind where the theme of servanthood was emerging as the dominant theme, and I think he was sort of in his reflections led me to think, I think what he's saying is that, well, you know, Presbyterian Church, Episcopal Church, the parking lots are empty, or, you know, Sunday schools are fully mobile, you know. I remember the day when I was Sunday school had 200. I don't think that ever happened, but I've heard it a lot. But we sure don't have 350 now, so we're worried about survival and that sort of thing. And I think what he was saying to me was, you know, I guess my discomfort with the church is that we're worried about the wrong things, and it should be. We should worry about what Jesus told us to do, basically what, and that's what brought me to this. And, wow, these things do sort of sneak up on me.
Can I say that the last poem you've got in Iowa by Seamus in, that was fantastic, because I'm going to go and buy his book, District and Circle. If I can get my hands on it, I'll actually buy it. He's a fantastic Irish poet. And I went into his history and so on, and I thought, wow, like I was always Yeats, and then I thought, this person, I have to get his work. Because that poem, as I went into it and did some research on it, has climate change, and it's so very relevant to today, and the rising waters and all this, you know, you can go into all the metaphors about rising waters and about the parting of the waves and everything. But I thought that was so relevant, and so relevant to understanding whether it's like he appeals to the academic, but he also appeals to the person in the street in his work. And I thought, it's wonderful because he can reach more people that way. And yeah, so I just have to say that for me, I hadn't discovered Seamus Heaney, and now I'm going to do work on him. I just think fantastic poet.
Yeah, you're good.
I've got more homework lots.
So
I said the same thing you did. Since you had more homework.
I just wrote all that stuff. Well, I thought, that's it, I'm
Yeah,
going to
well,
buy the book.
see, she wrote the whole thing. I just wrote up there.
So thank you for that, because that opens up a whole new poet to me, because I read poetry every night, and so I just thought, wow, he's not in my repertoire. I'm going to put him there.
Well, I suppose we should draw to a close. You've been wonderful friends in this, and I really appreciate your participation. My experience is that poetry is really community, and I am so much more enriched by reading it with others than I am just sitting in my chair reading through them. And so I'm grateful to you. Thank you for doing this.
And we're going to say thank you so much for doing it as well.
Yeah.
As I said before, because it's been, because me as a person who's been writing poetry since I was 13, as you say, to share is everything. And it really is wonderful to share people's deep and meaningful things in their life that come out in their poetry. So it's wonderful to share that and to have that. It's a Lenten practice. Going through Lent has been amazing.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you. English class as well. I mean, it's much more fun than when I did it in English.
Yes, yes. Well, probably because it's more of a Socratic form, you know, it's not didactic.
Yeah.
Just listen to the lecture.
Also, you told you had to be here.
Right. I don't have to have a test at the end, so.
Exactly.
No.
Well, you have memorized all the poems, haven't you?
before we even started, asked in the parking lot, I just got the biggest kick out of that. I said this, I think our first session. That Andy was leaving, I guess, from the early service, we were coming to the second service, and then I suppose Gary had announced the upcoming class or something. So Andy said to me, "What? Here you're doing something about poetry, doing Lent." And I said, "Is that excited anticipation?" And he said, "Not so much."
Hopefully he's changed his mind about that now.
Enjoy it. Yes.
Yeah, well, thank you for showing up.
Yes.
Ethereal. When you weren't here, it was fun. I never know how to include
There's nobody there now.
I don't know how to. I can sit here so I can see the screen. Because I've been sort of unaware of the folks who join us. In the line. Well, it's been a guess. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next time.
Next time is mysteries, right? I'm glad you mysteries.
And you can lead it.
Yeah, you're tired.
Oh, thank you.
That's a start.
So Mark is going to be co-leading the next.
Yes.
And what's interesting is Jim reads very few mysteries.
Yeah.
Because it's fun.
Yeah, well, and mysteries is probably more, I think would be appealing to him. Yeah, because it has the aspect of looking.
Right.
I just started reading Billy Summers. That's Stephen.
Well, it's.
It's not. It's a little bit of a mystery. It's about.
And then
I blank on the author's name.
Oh, Billy Summers is the
name of the book.
title.
Yeah, it's an assassin.
Oh.
Who's trying to get out
Oh,
of his.
so it's like a thriller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's doing his last assassination before he gets out.
Yeah.
But Stephen King is the author.
Oh, yes, right.
Yeah.
And so.
It was a couple weeks ago in that critique group I talked about before. And there's different writers, different styles and so forth. There's two authors, me and another guy who's just like polar opposites in style. I'm a genre fiction. And he's into literary, almost poetry, where he's constantly asks me to not explain things,
Every day I read
take them out,
1, 2, or 3 of the
so that
poems.
the author can interpret, I mean, the reader can interpret what's going on, a lot like from a poem. And when he writes, I said, it's almost like a E. Cummings. I can't figure out what you're trying to say. Yeah, like we're always crossing like that. But with that thriller in genre fiction, it's light reading. That's what I would call light reading because it's just straightforward. You read it, you experience it. There's no heavy theme, you know, try to piece out. There's no subtext that you need to parse out. Mysteries are a little bit more complicated because you track of stuff.
Yeah.
Hardest thing I have is trying to keep track of characters. Do you ever run into
I find that a lot. I think more so now because I do a lot of reading on the pad.
Mhm.
And it's harder to flip back pages to find out where somebody was introduced.
Oh.
Have you forgotten who
Yes.
this person is?
Yes.
And I'm saying,
Yeah.
how, you know, I mean,
That's
yes, you
fine.
can part of the page and all that, but you don't remember where, and when you're reading the book,
Yeah.
you have a feeling that it was, you know, he's a little
Flip back, or you could just flip back and your eye, it's amazing, your eye can just scan a page real quick. Yeah.
It's like, I really like reading on the
Yeah.
pad, it's convenient. But
I use the Kindle Reader. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Jim Lewis is one of those.
Right. I have the opposite experience because when I'm reading something on Kindle, I forget characters' names,
I do.
references.